So we're on chapter 26 in your world history book, and we're going to be getting into and talking about the Korean War that happened 1950 through 1953. So toward the end of World War II, Russian troops marched into Manchuria and North Korea. American forces then occupied South Korea. At the Potsdam Conference of the end of World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed to allow the Koreans to form a unified independent country after the elections, that they would be together, North and South Korea. But after the war, the Soviets refused to permit elections in North Korea and set up a stout communist puppet regime under Kim Il-sung. And then in South Korea, the Americans allowed the people to hold free elections and to choose representatives. And they drafted a constitution and elected Syngman Rhee as the first president of the Republic of Korea in 1948. So, what happens here in Korea? We have two separate governments. The North Koreans, communist, ruled by communism, and influenced by the Soviet Union, Russia, communist country. And then on the 38th parallel below, we have Americans helping South Korea. So we have two different types of government in one peninsula of the Korean peninsula. So here you see the pictures of the different leaders here, and you see of course, Syngman Rhee and Kim Il-sung up there in the Korean fight across the 38th parallel. Remember the word 38th parallel, because this is very important in the Korean War, because that's what divided South and North Korea. The course of the Korean conflict. So North Korea began to lay plans for the invasions into South Korea. And the North Koreans were encouraged by the Communist Revolution in China. You can see right here in the picture, you see China, and then you see North Korea and South Korea, that the peninsula of Korea comes right next to China. And so China is definitely helping North Korea. In 1950, the North Korean received their invitation to strike when the United States Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, publicly announced to the world that South Korea was outside the perimeter of the United States defense. So he publicly announced. So here's the Secretary of State in the United States saying, we are not going to support South Korea anymore. So this is a problem, isn't it? So now we have South Korea having to stand on its own against North Korea, which was supported by the communist Chinese and by the Russians at the time. So now we have the time that North Korea thinks, okay, now we can attack South Korea. The Americans are not going to help them. So on June 25th, 1950, North Korean troops blasted their way across that 38th parallel, across there, and invaded South Korea. So this began the Korean War. So let's see what goes from there. The Korean War. North Korean forces were equipped and trained by the Soviets and Communist Chinese. So they had a lot of weapons and a lot of support. They quickly overcame the South Korean resistance. Despite the United Nations, remember the United Nations did nothing for them, despite the United Nations and demanded to withdraw for North Korea, North Korean forces continued their advance and reached South Korea and the capital of Seoul on June 27th, 1950. So basically, the United Nations says, you guys have to stop this. But North Koreans and controlled under the Chinese communism and Russia were not going to listen to the UN. So President Truman of the United States took the matter to the United Nations General Assembly, saying, look what's happening in Korea. There was the war hero of World War II, as you recall, we went through World War II, General Douglas MacArthur. He was that war hero that went in to Japan, and Americans loved him. Well, he dispatched troops to Korea from Japan, and President Truman named General MacArthur Supreme Commander of all the United States and the United Nations forces in going into this Korean War, which the United States would be involved in protecting South Korea. So the UN said, okay, we'll go in with the United States against North Korean, what's going on here in Korea, and support South Korea. Now the situation becomes very critical in the Pusan perimeter. So you see this picture here, you see North Korea, you see South Korea, and down here is the Pusan Peninsula here, this area. And so let's watch what happens here. So the Free South Korea was outmanned and outgunned, even with the Americans. Even when America came in, South Korea did not have the military strength against the North Korean support from Red China. So we have Chiang Kai-shek. Remember him from China, the nationalist China? He offered to send 33,000 nationalist Chinese troops from nationalist Formosa or Taiwan to help and besiege, or to help the besiege that General MacArthur was doing. So he basically, Chiang Kai-shek said, I'm going to come and help my good friend Douglas MacArthur, that general, because they fought together actually in World War II. And he wanted to help them fight in Korea against North Korea. As a member of the UN Security Council, Communist China, remember Communist China is in the United Nations at this time. So Communist China exercised the option to become involved. They said, if Chiang Kai-shek comes in and fights in South Korea, they will come and support North Korea, which they already were doing. But they threatened America with bringing in Chiang Kai-shek. President Truman of the United States refused Chiang Kai-shek's offer and said, we better keep Chiang Kai-shek out of this war. Let's keep Taiwan out of this war, because if we do, we will be influencing the communist China into maybe a world war, thinking what's going to happen now. So Truman said, no, Chiang Kai-shek cannot come in. And so then the communist Chinese swiftly went in, basically helping the North Koreans. They basically lied and said what they were doing. They were already helping the North Koreans. And this made the whole war even worse between North Korea and South Korea. So we have world powers being involved. So, MacArthur, General MacArthur, the great war hero of World War II. So now he's going to be heading the South Koreans against the North Koreans. And he is an American general. It says, after a month of desperate and bloody battles among the Pusan perimeter, that's down here, see that picture, Pusan perimeter, the United Nations forces, which was headed, United Nations was headed by America and headed by MacArthur, our general, finally halted the North Korean advance. So now we're going to think everybody's going to cheer. Man, General MacArthur's coming in, and he's gonna win the war for South Korea. So, ordering his troops to keep the enemy occupied at Pusan, General MacArthur surprised the world by landing American force at Incheon near Seoul, far to the northwest of the Pusan perimeter. So basically they thought here's Pusan perimeter, and they thought that MacArthur would attack there, which he had already did. but instead he went all the way around to the west, to the northwest of South Korea, to Incheon. And at Incheon, that was a big surprise because no one thought that he would be there. MacArthur's troops recaptured Seoul and cut the North Korean supplies and joined other forces at Pusan. So now let's talk about, because I skipped this part here, but the reason about Incheon, why did they think that he would not go to Incheon? Because the tide was high and there was a very dangerous shoals, and it would make an amphibious landing pretty impossible. Basically, North Korea said that it's impossible for him to be able to land American troops, come in with American Navy, American amphibious, which were the American ships, would not be able to come into this area. But General MacArthur fooled them and did come in Incheon, and that was a major plus for South Korea. So now, cutting the North Korean supplies here, North Korean forces totally collapsed. The North Korea was like about ready to lose the whole war, and North Korean forces were totally disintegrated. And here General MacArthur is coming into North Korea, and everyone's cheering, thinking, man, South Korea has won the war and we're done with the Korean War. So American and South Korean troops entered North Korea at Pyongyang. The North Korean capital fell to South Korea on October 19th, 1950. Oh man, it would appear that the war was approaching an end, that communism would be driven out of Korea and all of Korea would be democratic and free. But something else happens. What do you think? Red China comes to the aid of North Korea. So the communist Red China, Mao Zedong, remember? But in November of 1950, the Korean War assumed a new character when over 300,000 fresh communist Chinese volunteers of the Red Chinese Army of 1 million troops invaded for North Korea. So basically these troops are coming in to help the North Korean communists. So now what is General MacArthur going to do? Well, the American troops were outnumbered 7-1. That's a big number. That means there's 7 Chinese, Chinese and North Koreans, communists, to every 1 American and South Korean. So the American troops were outnumbered 7-1, and they were exhausted already because they already been fighting the war, and China was sending in, all these, fresh communist Chinese volunteers in this army. So Seoul fell again on January 4th in 1951. So they went in and outnumbered them, but American and South Korean troops were able to reoccupy Seoul. Remember, Seoul is the capital of South Korea. And so they got into South Korea, overcome. So this war, we thought it was already won, but now we have the Chinese coming to the rescue of North Korea. So MacArthur reacts to Red China. So General MacArthur advocates all-out measures for victory, including the bombing of communist Chinese military bases and their supply lines and their dams and their bridges along the Yala River. So he's saying, we need to come in here. They're coming in through these areas, and we need to get rid of these bridges where they're coming in and the supply and all of their supplies to break the Chinese from coming in to North and onto South Korea. Instead, this is really pretty horrific, because instead the United States Defense Secretary George Marshall again told MacArthur to leave the bridges intact, not to bomb those bridges, and to allow the communists a 5-mile sanctuary on the Korean side of the Yalu River. Now, MacArthur's thinking, we need to bomb this. They can't keep coming in. And our Secretary of State's telling us to, no, don't do that. You know, they're going to be allowed to come in. What's happening here? So General MacArthur urged at the opening of the Second Front in China by using Chiang Kai-shek's national forces from Taiwan. Remember, Truman said, no, we're not going to use Chiang Kai-shek because that's going to bring the Red Chinese in. Well, the Red Chinese were already there. So MacArthur's like, yep, I'm allowing Chiang Kai-shek to come in. So now we got a problem because they're thinking, what? President Truman saying one thing, is General MacArthur doing another thing? Well, he declares that here's what basically General MacArthur says. He declares that the battle against world communism will be won or lost in Asia, that we have to go on full strength, or basically communism is going to come and take not only Korea but other nations. President Truman's shocking decision. So President Truman and the American leaders in Washington, D.C., they opposed General MacArthur's plans for final victory. They decided on a war that was called containment in Korea, that they would contain communism. Basically, containment is keep the status quo. So that they would not develop into full-scale conflict with communism. They thought, we don't want a full communism war against communism here. We just want Korea to stay the same, and that South Korea would still be free. So MacArthur protested that Washington's policies, the Washington government, Washington D.C.'s policies, were handcuffing the United States military effort for a victory in Korea. He said, this is not how we win a war, by containment. So President Truman shocked the nation by abruptly removing the great General Douglas MacArthur, who is American hero in World War II, and everyone behind him. He removed him on April 11th, 1951, replacing him with General Matthew B. Ridgway, that would basically follow the directions of containment. This was a weak policy, and with horrific results. President Truman's policy of limited warfare, refusing to use all available military strength to win a complete victory, doomed the American forces to a war of attrition against the masses of Red Chinese and North Korean troops. That means this war would go on for a way longer period than the Americans would be able to handle. So there were no further military advances that occurred. Like General Douglas MacArthur, of course, he wanted to advance to once and for all stop North Korea. In fact, advance into North Korea. Well, the United States did not advance at all, and peace talks were stalled several times. And on top of everything else, they would not even return the prisoners of war. They kept the prisoners of war. So many thousands of Red Chinese and North Korean prisoners were taken by, these are the prisoners that were taken now by the United States, but by South Korea. The prisoners of war, their prisoners of war. And guess what their prisoners of war did? Their prisoners of war did not want to go back to North Korea, did not want to go back to Red China. They wanted to be prisoners of war of America, because the Americans were treating them better than they would be treated if they were to return to the communist countries. They chose to remain United Nations prisoners. They wanted to be prisoners instead of going back to their communist prison. When I say communist prison, to their communist land. That is crazy, don't you think? But the communist negotiators, enraged at this, the communism leaders said, you need to return them even if they don't want to come back, right? that they had to be forcibly returned to communist control. So you even have the soldiers, the war prisoners, wanting to stay prisoners of war. But now, what's going to happen on the other side? The deadlock was broken. But before, I'm saying the prisoners of war, the North Koreans did not want to give back our prisoners of war at all. The deadlock was broken in 1953 when the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin died and the Soviet leaders began to speak of peace. So basically what was happening in Russia was affecting North Korea. And so the Russian pushed the Red Chinese and the North Koreans to accept a truce to stop this war that would go on and on and on, and which now was concluded between the UN. Of course, Russia and China are members of the UN, and so is America. And so here we have them trying to negotiate this, and North Korea, and with North Korea on July 27, 1953. A formal end to these hostilities was not really signed until 4 decades later. That's 40 years later. But at this time, the fighting did deadlock, or did stop, as you can say. The results of the Korean War were not good. South Korea, although it gained about 1,500 square miles, and the demilitarized zone was created between North and South Korea at the same spot before, South Korea suffered terribly. At least 1 million South Korean civilians perished and 400,000 military casualties at this time. The United States suffered over 162,000 casualties, and more than 5,000 American soldiers were taken prisoner or missing in action, and at least 400 of those prisoners were left behind in communist prison camps, never to return home. So the 5,000 American soldiers were taken, at least 400 were never to be seen, missing in action, and they were never given back. So how horrible is that? In addition, the United States spent about $67 billion on the Korean War. $67 billion. With all of the casualties, 5,000 American soldiers taken prisoner and missing in action, and now we know at least 400 were left behind in these prison camps, never to go home. How awful is that? It's not a good result, is it? America's first no-win war. We would have another no-win war after this in Vietnam, and we'll be talking about that. But Korea was a terrible failure. General Mark W. Clark, who was Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations Forces, American, in Korea, from May 1952 into the end of the conflict, he was so discouraged. He said, "I was not allowed to bomb the numerous bridges across the Yalu River over which the enemy was constantly pouring out trucks and ammunitions and killers. And how could this be?" And General MacArthur later testified, "Such a limitation on the utilization of available military force to repel an enemy attack has no precedence, either in our own history or in the history of the world." Basically, General MacArthur was saying that there never has been a solution to containment. How can a war be won in just a simple containment? So he said this has never been in the history of the world, and it is the first no-win war. General MacArthur's prophecy was, "No substitute for victory." That's what he said. He said before his dismissal by President Truman, General MacArthur had spoken prophetically before a joint session of Congress, which told the future. He said, "Once war is forced upon us, there is no other alternative than to apply every available means to bring it to a swift end. War's very object is victory, not prolonged indecision. In war, indeed, there can be no substitute for victory. So in the Korean War, there was no victory, just prolonged indecision. And we'll find that next. What happens next in our history, we'll be talking about the war in Vietnam, which definitely was prolonged with no victory. The containment being that substitute for victory, which would end up in a horrific place as communism is taking over. So, but anyway, so let's go on. But this was the Korean War, the first no-win war and no substitute. General MacArthur's prophesying no substitute for victory. Again, the war's very object is victory, not prolonged indecision.